All right, it's time to look at solving some problems involving rational equations. In our first situation, we have the distance between 2 points, A and B, being 480 kilometers. And then we have a Jeep and a truck, which are going to travel this distance. It says that if a Jeep can travel the distance with an average speed of 20 kilometers per hour faster than that of the truck, and therefore, because it's going faster, 2 hours faster, what is the average speed of the truck and of the Jeep? All right, so just as you read that question, you'll probably notice there's sort of three different things going on or being talked about. There's distance information, there's information about the speed of the two vehicles, and then there's information here about the time it takes to make the trip. And as we know from our past study of science or math or whatever, that these three components, speed, time, and distance, let's just put the units down to remind ourselves. Speed in kilometers per hour in this question, time in hours, and distance in kilometers. We know that the connection between these three things is that speed multiplied by time is equal to distance. Speed multiplied by time is equal to distance. So that's one connection we're going to have to be mindful of and utilize. All right, to get started with this algebraically, as per usual, we usually look at what we're trying to find in the question. And right at the end of the question, it says, what is the average speed? We are trying to find the speed of the truck and the speed of the Jeep. And because there's two things going on here, I'm going to create myself a chart just to sort this all out. We have the truck, we have the Jeep, and we're trying to find the speed. So our variable x will represent the speed of the truck or the Jeep. And if I read back in the second sentence, the Jeep can travel the distance with a speed 20 kilometers faster than the truck. So if we let the truck's speed be x, the Jeep's speed would be x plus 20. Another thing I'm going to put into this table is distance information. We know that both vehicles are going to travel 480 kilometers. And that leaves us to fill in the time column. Well, actually, because we know this connection over here that speed times time is distance, we could get the time by dividing both sides by speed. We know distance divided by speed is time. So therefore, to get the time traveled by the truck, we could take the truck's distance divided by the truck's speed, and this expression, 480 over x, will represent the time that the truck spent traveling the distance. And similarly for the Jeep, if we take the Jeep's distance divided by the Jeep's speed, then this expression will represent the length of time the Jeep spent traveling the distance. All right, so we have our variables defined, and now we need an equation to solve. And in order to do that, we have to draw out one more piece of information from the question, and that piece of information is right here. We haven't used this information about time. The Jeep is traveling faster, which means that the Jeep's time versus the truck's time will be 2 less, 2 hours less. The Jeep is going to travel for 2 hours less than the truck because the Jeep is traveling faster. If you travel faster, it takes less time. So this time will be 2 hours less than this time. So in other words, if we take the time traveled by truck and the time traveled by Jeep, since this is 2 hours less than the truck's time, the difference between those would be 2 hours. All right, so we will solve this equation by multiplying both sides by the common denominator, which is x times x plus 20. And here we have two terms, so we have to distribute our common denominator to the two terms. And we would get 480 times x plus 20 minus 480 times x equals our right-hand side. I'm going to multiply the equation out. And on this side, the 480x's cancel out. Looks like we're coming up to a quadratic equation because I have our x squared in here. So I'm going to set the equation to 0. 2x squared plus 40x minus 9600. And to make this equation easier to solve, why don't I divide both sides by 2? 0 divided by 2 is 0. You can divide by 2 or you can factor that out. And we now have our equation here which we need to solve. Now we can try to factor this or use the quadratic formula. Looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 4800 and add or subtract to 20. And if I think about that, 80 and 60, if we had negative 60, so that would have been x plus 80 and x minus 60. Therefore, x is potentially negative 80, or x is 60. Now remember, if we go back to our table, our x represents speed. So we can't have a negative speed, so we're going to reject that. So x equaling 60 kilometers per hour is possible. Let's just roll back to our chart and see how this works. So if x is 60, our truck would have been going 60 kilometers per hour. And our Jeep would have gone 80 kilometers per hour. And if the truck was going 60 kilometers per hour for 480 kilometers, 480 divided by 60 means that the truck would have taken 8 hours. If the Jeep was going 80 kilometers an hour for 480 kilometers, then distance 480 divided by 80 speed would be 6 hours. And we can see from our chart that in fact the Jeep spent 2 hours less traveling than the truck because the Jeep was going faster, specifically 20 kilometers per hour faster than the truck. And so we have the right information here. So therefore, our truck is traveling 60 kilometers per hour and the Jeep is traveling 80 kilometers per hour.